crawling through the streets of Los Angeles, feasting on piles of uncollected trash. Now, the I-Team exposed a problem recently, and the city vowed to clean it up. But we found evidence the city's rodent population is growing, pushing those rats and possibly disease closer to homes and businesses.
They laughed a stainless steel punchline with whiskers. Los Angeles rolled out robotic cats, and the memes wrote themselves: chrome tabbies in alleys, science fiction for dumpsters. Headlines mocked, comments piled up. Almost no one asked the only useful question: what if it worked? While the jokes echoed, the fix started where the problem lived: behind kitchens, under docks, along warm seams of shadow. No speeches, no countdown, just quiet machines learning the map.
Rattiest city in America.
Now, one local group is trying to fix the problem by sending another furry friend out to patrol the city streets.
This was not a stunt, it was strategy. They were not built to hunt. They were built to apply pressure posture, stillness, a claimed corner that makes boldness expensive. Predation as a signal, not a bloodbath. It is a clever idea, but will it be effective enough? Stay with us, because the surprise is not just the results that came. It is how quickly behavior bent once a calm watcher took its place. What changed and how it works. Here is the pivot from headlines to results. Rats and mice were not winning by courage. They were winning by reading our routines. A trash lid left a finger wide. A bowl of pet food left full after dusk. A garage door with a thin gap that becomes a night highway. Old fixes made new problems. Poison dimmed hawks and owls and sent pets to clinics. Snap traps hurt fingers. Glue boards turned cleanliness into cruelty. Ultrasonic boxes hummed until rodents learned to ignore the sound. The city did not need more noise. It needed a presence that made boldness costly for rodents and harmless for everyone else. That presence arrived as a compact, smart safe zone. The entrance is shaped so only a slim body can pass. A cat paw cannot. A dog nose cannot. A toddler finger cannot. The attractant sits inside, out of reach. The interior ends the visit quickly and cleanly. No poison, no loose bait, no secondary death in the food web. The guidance is simple and private. Sensors read only what helps with placement. Tiny vibrations along a wall, a small temperature seam near a vent. The motion line that repeats night after night. No faces, no voices, no personal data. The device does not try to be clever. It tries to be correctly placed. Put it on the path rodents already use, not where it is convenient for you. The power is not in the microchips. The power is in the path. That is why the governor's message was plain. Stop scattering toxins. Use targeted pressure. Protect pets. Restore calm. The early failures that taught the system how to move. Real deployment exposed the gaps immediately. The first prototypes stood too tall, imposing to humans, irrelevant to rats. Night cameras showed rodents treating them like new obstacles, nothing more. Engineers shortened frames, lowered centers of gravity, and softened motion. The next models moved well, but expressed the wrong emotion. Their turns read as curious, not threatening. Rats ignored them. Each failure delivered a lesson. Size signaled intention. Timing signaled confidence. Hesitation signaled risk. Engineers slowed head turns, delayed foot plants, refined tail posture. Gradually, the machines projected a believable, low-key threat. Alongside those adjustments, data teams mapped the city's true rat corridors by blending sanitation logs, outage reports, delivery patterns, and complaint histories. From this mosaic emerged the hidden arteries rats used. Narrow seams between warehouses, shaded patio edges, the warm lips of storm drains. Blanketing the city with robots would never work. Targeting pressure points would. The tests ended. The streets would make the next judgment. The Night 1 district blinked. The pilot district was an industrial zone that fed half of Los Angeles before dawn. Long docks, stacked pallets, rows of bins. Human life pulsed there while most of the city slept. At 3 o'clock in the morning, unmarked trucks rolled in. Crews lifted sleek, quiet forms and slid them beneath docks, beside vents, near familiar rat entry points. Status lights flickered, then dimmed. Tails lifted, heads rose, then almost everything went still. Each robot chose a posture based on its placement. One curled near the lip of a drain. Another sat squarely in front of a gap in a fence. A third watched the space between two crowded dumpsters. They did not roam, they occupied. Cameras and nearby fixtures watched only one thing: shifting pools of heat near the ground. Rats emerged along their usual routes and met something new. They froze, they sniffed the air, they edged closer, then stopped again. That pause was everything. It showed up as a delay on the timeline and as a kink in movement trails. Where straight lines once sliced across open space, new paths hugged the wall. Where corridors once pulsed with activity, heat signatures thinned. By sunrise, the heat maps told the story. The rats were still there, but their confidence had cracked. The city did not claim victory. One night does not solve a problem that took decades to grow, but it did prove that the language the robots were speaking made sense. Moving from one changed district to the rest of the city, Los Angeles now had a different challenge: winning over the people who made the jokes. When news of the pilot spilled beyond internal reports, it did so as entertainment. Robot cats patrol Los Angeles alleys made good copy. The laughter returned. Alongside the jokes, real worries surfaced. Were these walking cameras? Would they record faces and license plates? Would they scare pets? Would they confuse birds? Would they turn already anxious neighborhoods into places where people felt watched for the wrong reasons? The project leaders understood something simple. Without trust, the cats would become targets. So they invited people in. Instead of glossy presentations, they hosted alley demonstrations. Residents stood a few steps away as the units powered up, adjusted, and settled into watchful stillness. They listened to the faint hum. They watched them yield space to real dogs and cats walking past. Advocates and skeptics were allowed to review how the system worked. Privacy groups received diagrams of what the sensors could and could not do. The list of what they could not do was the important part. No faces, no voices, no reading of license plates, no individual tracking, just motion fields and anonymous thermal shapes anchored to a map. Questions turned into changes. People asked for softer indicator lights in residential streets. Crews reinforced casings for waterfront districts where salt and wind were brutal. Dust sealing improved for units stationed near construction. The rollout expanded, but not by blanketing the city. It grew by careful placement, always along the real rat routes that the data kept revealing. As more units came online, the network began to behave in a new way. Moving from coverage to comprehension, the system learned to anticipate. Now, what would you fix first in your neighborhood? A noisy alley, a messy corner, a space people avoid? Drop it in the comments. For more stories where smart design quietly improves real life, hit subscribe. And if this made you think twice about your city, tap like. When the robots seemed to lean into the future, there was no single night when the robots woke up. Nothing mystical happened. What changed was the quality of the decisions the system made. The logs showed it first. A unit stationed at a dock would subtly rotate its head toward a vent, seconds before a small cluster of heat signatures appeared nearby. Another shifted its weight toward a particular gap just before rats approached, and then veered away. The robots were not seeing the future. They were learning where their posture would matter most. Every hesitation, every ignored warning, every successful deterrence was recorded. Over time, these micro failures and small wins were combined and recombined into new patterns. The system began choosing slightly better postures and positions a little earlier each night. Engineers compared it to a flock subtly changing direction, or to a thermostat getting more accurate. Regardless of metaphor, the effect on the ground was clear. Rats started to adjust their courage. They avoided open spaces in daylight. They hugged shadows more tightly. They shifted their busiest moments away from human rush hours. Places that had felt brazenly alive with rat activity at noon settled into quieter, more respectful rhythms. Still, instinct and anecdotes were not enough. Moving from hunches to hard proof, the city went looking for numbers. The quiet math that proved. It was working first came the service calls, reports of rat sightings and gnaw damage from areas with long-standing units started to drop. Week after week, the numbers curved downward. Utilities saw fewer outages linked to chewed cables in yards that now hosted watchful metal silhouettes. Health inspectors logged fewer rat traces in kitchens that had once been regular offenders. Emergency pest control contracts were not renewed in certain properties because incidents were no longer frequent enough to justify them. School custodians noticed something simple. The hallways that used to be checked twice every morning for surprise visitors no longer demanded the same vigilance. Grocery and warehouse managers ordered less poison and fewer traps. None of these changes made breaking news. Together, they quietly rewrote the everyday experience of parts of the city. Residents felt it as a relaxation they could not quite name. A walk through a back alley no longer came with the same unconscious shoulder tension. The space behind a favorite cafe stopped feeling like the edge of a problem and started to feel like part of the neighborhood again. And then the oddest part of the experiment came into focus. Moving from rodents to residents, it turned out the cats were changing people too. The robots that made humans. Tidier robotic cats were never meant to police human behavior, yet people reacted to them. Night shift workers who had long left dumpsters slightly ajar found themselves closing them with an extra tug when a robot watched from the corner. Delivery staff stopped wedging back doors open, just for a moment. Smokers flicked fewer crumbs and wrappers into the same dark corners. The machines had no way to punish anyone. They had no tickets to write, no buzzers to sound, no lectures to deliver. They just stayed, patient and attentive, in places where shortcuts had become normal. Businesses began to tighten routines without being told. Trash runs were scheduled more carefully. Lights in neglected alleys were finally fixed. Once ignored, spaces became shared responsibility again. The change was not fear. It was accountability shaped by awareness. Of course, criticism did not disappear. Some insisted that the cats were surveillance systems in friendly shapes. Others worried about wildlife, worried about mission creep, worried about trading one kind of city anxiety for another. The project answered the same way it had from the start, with adjustments. Documentation was updated and made public, spelling out limits in plain terms. Behavior libraries were edited so units would yield to real animals. Deployment schedules were moved to avoid sensitive wildlife periods. Trust grew slowly, not because of perfect branding, but because people saw the system change when they asked it to. Moving from concept to routine, the story of the robot cats settled into something less glamorous and far more important. The boring work that kept everything honest. Behind the scenes, technicians wiped grit from gimbals, swapped batteries, and replaced parts before failure showed. Behavior designers refined half-second gestures so posture read as caution, not threat. Analysts traced new rat corridors on shifting maps and rerouted units around festivals and construction. Things went wrong. Heat waves slumped early models until cooling shrouds became standard. A theft forced anti-theft alarms. A bad software push locked several units in. Identical aggressive poses outside a market, and guardrails were added to posture libraries. Each mistake led to a fix, a rule, and a public note, so the same error did not recur. The surest signs of success were small: a custodian deleting a daily planter check, an electrician noting a heat wave without gnaw-related outages, a deli owner moving the broom away from the back door because he no longer reached for it at every sound. Nature as a manual for urban design. Looking back, the most durable idea behind the robot cats was not the hardware or even the data. It was the way the project borrowed from the rules of living systems. In nature, predation is not endless violence. It is structure. It makes some choices expensive so that most choices can remain free. The robots copied that function gently. Rats did not vanish. They shifted back into the shadows that properly belonged to them. People did not abandon responsibility to machines. They discovered that when they kept lids closed and doors latched, the system rewarded them with fewer problems. The city worked better when it behaved a little more like the ecosystem it had displaced. Once that principle was clear, the idea stopped being about rats at all. Moving from conclusion to invitation, the experiment turned into a blueprint. What other cities can steal from Los Angeles? The instructions are surprisingly simple. Do not bury a neighborhood in devices. Place just enough presence along real problem corridors to turn bad habits into bad bets. Pair every robot on the ground with someone who is clearly responsible for its maintenance. If the people cannot keep up, the machines will fade into background noise. Tell the public exactly what the devices collect and what they do not. Keep those limits in code and contracts, not just in speeches. Budget for broken hardware, strange seasons, and human mistakes. Expect to update rules and apologize in public when something fails. Involve skeptics and wildlife advocates early so that their concerns become edits, not lawsuits. Most of all, remind everyone that the power of the project lies in the habit, not the hardware. The robot is just the mirror. Once those ideas start to sink in, new possibilities appear. Engineers sketch robotic owls that might gently push pigeons away from fragile landmarks without hurting them. Gardeners imagine mechanical pollinators that could support stressed urban gardens while natural pollinators recover. Wildlife teams propose posture-based presences near certain crossings to guide coyotes towards safer routes instead of fencing them out entirely. The goal is not a robotic wilderness. It is one careful imitation at a time, always leaving room for real life to lead. And yet, for all the speculation, the part that shocks people most is still the simplest one. The joke that stopped being funny. People expected the robot cats to fail. The more dramatic critics predicted disaster. What almost nobody expected was what actually happened. The machines worked, yes. They shifted rat behavior. They cut service calls, they reduced damage, and made certain corners of the city feel less infested. But the real surprise was what they did to people. They reminded everyone, gently and constantly, that some spaces deserve care. They showed that it is possible to enforce courtesy without fines, to reward patience without applause, to make daylight boldness costly again without poison or fury. They worked because they were precise instead of flashy, patient instead of theatrical, adjustable instead of absolute. Once the laughter faded, the robots turned out to be less of a story about technology and more of a story about design. Any city could start writing its own version if it was willing to look honestly at itself. Moving from someone else's story to your own, the last image lands not in Los Angeles, but wherever you live. Dusk, a rooftop, and your street. Imagine an evening in Los Angeles now. The sky is shifting from bright to deep blue. On a low rooftop above a once troublesome alley, a robot cat settles where rough tar meets cooling air. Its head angles toward a vent, holds for a moment, then eases back into stillness. It is not hunting, it is insisting. On the ground, a worker drops a bag into a bin and snaps shut the latch that used to dangle open all night. Across the way, a real cat walks a brick ledge, pauses to glance at the machine with mild curiosity, then continues on, entirely unbothered. Somewhere in a small control room, a technician notes a softer trail of heat along a corridor that burned bright last week, and smiles. No one throws a celebration. No one walks by thinking about innovation. But in that quiet, a city breathes a little easier. Los Angeles was mocked when the first robotic cats appeared. Then the outages went down, the service calls dropped, the rats retreated to the edges, and the streets remembered how to behave. The technology, in the end, was never the headline. Design was. A quiet presence, placed carefully, made arrogance expensive again without poison or panic. So now it comes to you. What simple moment would you bring back to your neighborhood a cleaner alley, a calmer lunch break, a park bench you actually use? Picture that moment. Then ask yourself what quiet presence could help make it real again. Share your answer in the comments. If you want more stories where smart, subtle design fixes real problems, subscribe so you do not miss the next one. And if this made you see your city a little differently, give it a like. It helps more people find these ideas.